All right. Our team consisted of a sponsor, John Sitkowski, Vice President for Financial and Auxiliary Services, myself, Scott Barnett, math instructor, Tom Anderson, who is a history instructor, Barb Eisterhold from General Accounting, Sandro Silvestri from Information Technology, and Mary Szymanski, who couldn't be with us today. She's probably someplace much warmer. I'm not sure exactly where. Where's that? Oh. All right. And that doesn't sound like more fun, I don't think. And she's an accounting associate from Accounts Payable. And to get us started off, Scott Barnett.
Just want to give you a bit of history as to how we came to this particular project. Business Services and John Sitkowski Cabinet in general had, through John, had a list of ideas for us, and we had our own ideas looking for ways to essentially allow the institution to continue its path toward fiscal or financial stability. That is a huge area. And we then, from that list of ideas, looked at, say, bad debt deterrence and some other ideas, although there are already initiatives underway related to that. We wanted to improve service to students and also to internal folks, and the check refund process came up during that discussion. We looked at actually reducing the number of checks both to students and to faculty and staff, but initiatives are already underway, and you'll hear more soon actually about initiatives underway related to faculty and staff and reduction in paper checks. So we decided to focus on the student end of things. In narrowing this down to students, I believe Kevin stated as a factor of 4 times as large as what we actually narrowed this down to. When Dr. Jensen was making the point that we should narrow our field down to 5 acres, I was the team scribe and misrecorded that as saying 0.5 acres. And so that brings us to the project statement here. To improve the process for issuing refunds to students who have credit balances on their accounts, as measured by the reduction in the number of paper refund checks, reduction in costs, supplies, for example, postage, bank fees, reduction in reported refund-related cases of fraud, and reallocation of staff time. So all of this will be fleshed out in the pages and in the parts of the presentation ahead. So I will turn this now over to Sandro.
In terms of financials, financial services, there's a lot of terms that that they use. We've got 2 pages worth basically over here, and I just want to highlight a couple of them. Check fraud, which is something that's a big concern and costs us money. Counterfeit check, not so much cost to us, but cost to the people that get the counterfeit check and cash them. EFT, e-check, direct deposit, these are all just different options that we have in terms of paying students their refunds. Emergency checks, checks that are used by the cashier's office, process check outside the normal weekly check run. We do quite a few of those. Everybody knows what a financial aid award is, I take it. I mean, that's kind of our big business here, and we've heard a lot about that lately. We do a ton of paper checks here, and you'll see the numbers on that. A great deal of paper checks takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of resources, and a good number of man hours to do paper checks. And then, of course, there's a stop payment. Basically, students lose their checks, and we have to stop payment on the check, or they're stolen if we can stop it on time. So in terms of terminology, there's a lot more that we could have done, but these are the ones that we felt for our glossary were the most important. All right? Now for Kevin.
This will probably be hard enough to see in your book, let alone on the overhead projector. If you haven't donated all of your glasses to Dr. Barber yet, you may want to put them on. As we got started with our process here, we thought it would be good to understand how the process currently works, so that then we could look at some holes in there, some flaws, some areas of improvement. And so what we've got outlined in front of you is a flow chart of the current student refund check process. And as you can see from the chart, which is on page 8 of your book, the current process for issuing student refunds is very complex. It is very long, involving many steps and many individuals, and it's also critical that these steps occur in a specific order to make sure that the functions happen as necessary. I won't try to bore or confuse you with all the details. However, the process all starts from when a credit balance is created on a student account. This most often happens as a result of a financial aid payment being put on the student accounts, but not exclusively. There's other ways that credit balances occur. The process goes on to include many system steps, many system reports, many ad hoc reports, various communications between HFCC offices or HFCC and our banks, and it ends up with the printing, folding, mailing of paper checks, the submission of several electronic files to our bank, and the posting and reconciliation of many accounting entries. As you'll see in two or three additional charts later on that Barb is going to go over, the process improvement recommendation does not eliminate all of these steps and processes, but eliminates a great deal of them, removing significant manual effort, material cost, time, and also some loopholes in the process. Moving on to page 9, then after looking at the existing process, we laid out a cause and effect diagram to try to pinpoint some of the specific areas that we were hoping to get at in our eventual recommendation in terms of things that we wanted to either improve upon or eliminate. As we began to examine the current process, we started out developing this cause and effect diagram, exploring the problem statement, which is problems encountered issuing refunds to HFCC students. In exploring these causes and effects, we looked at the environment, the process issues, materials, measurement, methods, and people, finding cause and effect issues such as you will see on the chart, fraud is a significant issue that we've talked about in recent years. A lack of financial literacy among our students. We've done some things to try to address that now. Many of our students are not only not financially literate, they don't have bank accounts. So that's something we talked about. And they don't necessarily understand banking fees and the banking process. As you'll see, all of these things are going to come in later on as part of our overall recommendation as to how we can help educate students in these things as well. Process issues, there's escheat regulations, and what escheat regulations are is when a check becomes stale dated after a certain period of time, usually 180, 240 days, monies have to be returned to the state government or the federal government. There's also significant issues with fraud and counterfeiting. And as Sandro highlighted just a little bit, we have not only fraud issues related to people fraudulently acquiring financial aid, but we've had a significant problem with individuals counterfeiting our checks and taking them to check cashing places and party stores and trying to pass them off as valid college checks. And as Sandro indicated, the college doesn't end up being liable on those, but it certainly creates a lot of bad will as well as a lot of time and effort in terms of tracking those down with the banks and those entities. Try to get not into too much detail and save that for the rest of you. Stop payment requests are a big issue, emergency checks, check reissuance. So when checks are canceled or there's counterfeit checks involved, a lot of times we have to reissue checks. Material costs, we have a significant, as Sandro indicated, we have a significant number of paper checks we currently cut, and you'll see in charts later on about the cost of the check stock, the postage, and the toner involved in that. In our measurement area, we looked at potential costs to students such as check cashing services, debit cards, and ATM fees. Check cashing services, when they go to a party store, when they go to a check cashing service, they often pay a significant premium on top of that in order to cash their check, and that's lost money to the student. And by moving to the process that we're hoping to get to, as we'll see later on here, it'll hopefully eliminate the students from having that part taken off the top of their check. Also educate them on how to use debit cards and ATM fees wisely to manage those. In the methods, paper check, we looked at paper checks versus having a debit card or having a third-party debit card or a bank account or EFT. There's many different ways that the money can get to the students without the use of a paper check. And in terms of the people, we looked at the labor costs that's involved in the entire process in the cashier's office, the accounting office, and then also responding to the many calls that we get regarding good checks, counterfeit checks, wanting to pick up checks and things of that nature. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Tom, who's going to talk about the cost of the paper check student refund process.
I tried to keep this chart as simple as possible. The growth that you'll see peaking in academic year 2009-10 is certainly a function of the number of paper check transactions that grew over time, and since the introduction of the ETF, the electronic check system 3 years ago, it has begun to decline a little bit, but also our number of students have declined too. So what we did here is we tried to color code the various elements of the cost. The legend should be self-explanatory. At the very bottom, we have the cost of paper and toner, postage, stop payments, and of course the two most significant costs were labor, the hours that the accounting office spent processing student refunds, and the number of hours the cashier's office spent. Now I must say that as early in the process, as soon as we started talking about labor savings, as a union thug, I had to bring up the question about whether we were talking about layoffs here or whether we were talking about reallocation of an overworked and understaffed series of departments, is what I was told was the case. So I then felt better about trying to squeeze every dime we could out of the process. So, as you can see, the cost is really quite substantial. The last year was $109,000, $130,000 the year before. 2009, 2010, it was $153,600. So we can certainly do better than this by, well, stay tuned.
So when we were talking about the cost of running paper checks, we decided to see, it would be a good practice to see what other colleges are doing. So I know other areas, this is a business officers area of community colleges. The other 27, there's 28 total in Michigan. But we want to see what were their issues and see if they were having the same problems that we are and how they were addressing it. So we did a survey of the 28, 5 didn't respond. We had 23 responses. Out of that, 10 of them outsources. 7 of them were looking at higher one education. There's one that at US Bank, one at PNC Bank, and one at Nelnet, which is really new into the process. But we also use Nelnet for ACH and fax for us, which is the payment plan for students. Our cost is unknown, obviously, until we do an RFP and get more details into the process of what our specific cost will be. But it appears that most people that are using this, it's approximately 40 cents a check. And when you look at the total cost of what we are paying in labor and running these checks, I mean, you do a little bit every week, so it doesn't seem like a lot, but when we looked at everything in total, what the annual cost is and what the annual hours are, we were all surprised that, you know, what is the time frame really as a whole that we're spending on running these checks. And not just the paper checks, it's the whole process. But the paper checks are the ones that are causing the problems because they're the ones that have all the problems with the fraud, the counterfeits, the stop payments. The stop payments alone that we do really are staggering. And it's a time-consuming process, not just for the cashier's area, but for our area as well. So, and getting at some of the details, there's 3 different options that you can use for an outsource. One, you can use it just as a refund tool. So instead of us, we send them a file, they do all the refunds for us. Another option that only one of the colleges are using is as a one card. So it's a stored value card. There's a lot of regulations on that, and there's a lot of issues that go with that. So a lot of colleges opt not to go that route. One other route that another college does that was pretty unique was just to have a refund tool, but also to use it as an ID card. So they run it into their process with an orientation or with doing testing, so everybody gets a card whether they use it as a refund or not, it's still a student ID card. And I think it makes it more personable. The college that actually did that did not start out that way. They just did it as a refund card, but they found that some of the students felt like it was forced upon them. And by making it a student ID, it made it more personable, it gave it more value. It gave them a sense of the college that they're going to, and they didn't fight it as much. It was like, oh, there's a purpose for it, other than you're trying to make me do something a certain way. You know, they took it as, okay, I'm part of this college, I have an ID card. So that was much, much better for them. I did ask if there was any regrets, if there is any other things you would do. I would say that everybody I talked to, there was not one person that said, we're sorry we did it. You know, there was no regrets. It was a real time saver for them. It's a smooth process, and the students overall seem to be happy with the process. Like Kevin said, it's hard to read this graph. But what we tried to highlight with this is that all of the yellow, if we did decide to go to an outside process would be virtually eliminated. So the steps that it takes to run a file, run the cashiers would still create a file, and that file would be sent to the outside source. And then from that, they would handle everything else, whether it be an ACH to a bank account, whether it be to a debit card, or there's still an option to students that truly resist to do a paper check, although it is not, some schools actually do not like to do the paper check, so they give them the other two options. Even though that third option is available, they don't kind of make it known as a third option because they still run into the process and the problems that we would have. You know, it wouldn't be a check from Henry Ford Community College, it would be a check from that third party, but it would still have our school name on it, and the less paper checks you have out there, you're still going to have the problems with the fraud. You still could have the counterfeit, even though it wouldn't be our responsibility, it's still our college's name. So they decided not to make that an available option, or they have incentives for them to do it another way by, okay, if you choose to do electronically, we'll give you your money 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. If you really do want a paper check, you're going to have to wait just that extra time, just so that, you know, the students, they want their money as soon as they can get it. So they will get a debit card, or they will decide to go and get it via bank. What we estimated for cashiers, and I think it'll be talked a little bit more in detail in dollars, but looking at the total, by going to an outside, the cashiers estimated they would save about 778 hours annually by them not processing the file, by sending it externally. And the accounting office would save close to 500 hours, which when you look at it in total is really quite significant. The cashiers, they spend their time mostly, you know, with processing the checks, and as Kevin alluded to, you know, even printing, you know, 20,000 checks, you know, 29,000 checks in a year. I mean, the time frame that it takes, you know, to do that. And then they have to sort them, you know, and then they have to, there's bad addresses in there, so they have to make sure those all get out. From the accounting standpoint, it's mostly from every check that's cleared on a daily basis, we have to go into the system and clear those checks, so that we know when cashiers wants to look at somebody's account and somebody wants to know, hey, when's my check going out? And we're looking at it, and they can look and say, oh, it's cleared. Sorry, it cleared a week ago. And that's when the process starts. Well, I didn't get it. You know, it's like, so it's a whole stop payment process. The cashiers have to do that part. Financial services have to do our part in accounting to do the stop payment. We have to check that on the website. We have to verify. It's just a very tedious process. You have to check the dollar amount, the payee, especially with the counterfeit out there. We've actually had checks out there that are the right check number, the right amount, but the payee is different. So you have to really check. I mean, they're really getting good at this stuff, so you really have to verify before you make a stop payment that you're stopping the proper check. And of course, that has a cost to us as well from the bank. This was just more our ta-da screen, just because when you look at the difference, you know, between what these steps are, and I just counted them right before as I was sitting down there, so hopefully, this is 50 steps. So by going to this, we could eliminate, we'd be down to 13. We do know that there will not be possible for us to eliminate all checks at the college, because there's going to be some emergency, we do emergency runs, there's chances that we do third-party checks for students where we have to make the check payable to, like, say, they're renting, you know, and they're behind in their rent, so they have an emergency and they work with student, you know, the SOS, and they're approved to get a check. So they do dual checks between maybe the landlord and the student, so those have to be signed over. In those cases, you can't use an outside party. So we know we're not totally eliminating the process, but we are severely reducing the process. And to talk more about the cost savings, back is Tom.
Well, the chart shows in the blue columns, the amount of money that we have spent over the last 3 years. These are the 3 years that we've actually had the electronic funds transfer option available. The slide that has the yellow and revised flow chart on it has an estimate of saving, only having to issue 1 to 3% of paper checks. In calculating the cost savings, I was more conservative and estimated that we'd only save 90% of the cost of the paper checks. And what that means is the difference is substantial, saving in the neighborhood of 77 to 78% of our annual cost in student refunds by outsourcing. And that seems to be significant, and who knows, it could even perhaps purchase the recruiter module that has been recommended early this morning.
Barb and Kevin have referred already to some of the factors that led to us recommending this particular procedure or modification to the student refund procedure. I actually want to start, though, on the restraining forces side. I just want to point out a couple of things here. You can read through what's in here. But Barb did refer to the running of emergency checks, and that was a concern in our discussions in moving to this new process. We want to make sure that, say, if a student, if the college is going to need to send a check directly to a landlord or something on behalf of a student, that we would still be able to do that. That would not be taken care of by the third-party vendor in this new process, or at least not entirely taken care of by a vendor. The lack of financial literacy among students was a major concern here. There would be the danger with a debit card that students could rack up significant fees. Now, certainly with checks right now, they can rack up significant fees by going to check cashing stores and having a large percentage of their refund, or significant percentage, let's say, eaten up by a fee. But misuse of a debit card could lead to the same thing, and it's not necessarily as noticeable because it's a certain number of cents per transaction, but you have a lot of transactions and that adds up. Any request for proposal related to this, any company would be required to have a certain number of fee-free ATM transactions for the students, so that students could withdraw their financial aid refund without paying fees. So these were restraining forces, but we think we're able to deal with them as part of a careful request for proposal here. So the financial literacy piece, for example, is also a driving force, because, say, requesting that any company that provides third-party services have a financial literacy component for students would be a benefit for students. There is significant time spent, I know, in financial aid in general, we know in general, keeping up with regulations. They change from year to year. The regulations related to, say, the achievement process and things that directly affect student refunds, the individuals here would not need to, say, be trained as much on, because a third-party vendor would be responsible for keeping up with that. So there were many driving forces that have led us to recommend this change in process, procedure. With that, I will turn this over to Sandro.
Before I start explaining this chart, I was actually quite amazed to find out that we actually cut checks to landlords. I didn't realize we did that, and I told Barb we should probably keep that money and open some dorms. After I leave facility services, of course. All right. The first two, you can read that, right? I'm not even going to bother putting my glasses on because I can't even read it with my glasses on, so I just got to hold it like that. The first two really is where we are right now. The second line basically is our CPI report. So as you can tell by this Gantt chart, we are on schedule. So we're doing good. Now, when we hit first step number 3, that means that we're assuming that this is going to be approved. All right? Because while some people are looking for recruiter, I'm voting on the KIVEC if we save any money. So anyway, so for the next step, which would occur in November, which does not give us a lot of time, but financial services staff review and recommend and work with purchasing department to develop a request for proposal. If I remember correctly, during our process, we did find some RFPs out there that we could use that we don't have to go back and start from scratch. Basically, starting in December, we issue the RFP, and the RFP then comes back, I believe, in February sometime. So that should give us enough time to basically look at it, put it out there, give vendors time. We could have the meetings, ask questions, doing the standard RFP process, which I'm sure Fred's really looking forward to that. Then we start in January, we really start looking a little bit more into the RFPs that are reviewed and vendors selected, and that would be done by about March 2014. We would have, and this would really be up to the cabinet, Dr. Jensen. When we decide to move forward, it might be a good idea to do a presentation to the board. So the soonest we could do something like that would be, March at the earliest. So we sign a contract with a vendor, we implement the plan, we start working with the staff to implement it. We meet with, the CPI team meets in May with the financial services staff for a little 6-month review to see how things are going on. The big thing is the May through August pilot. We're really looking at, effectively doing a pilot during the spring, summer, see how it works. Spring, summers here are not real heavy time. This would be a good way to shake it out. Step 11, item number 11, is going to be very, very important. It's a large-scale communications plan. I think this is important that we let the students know, but we're going to have to somehow possibly let the parents know as well. I know my daughter, when she got a debit card in the mail from her college, I was asking, what did you sign up for? So am I responsible for this? So turns out, yes, I am responsible, but that's a whole other issue. But we really have to have a really good plan for communicating this to students. Because if they're expecting to get a check from us in the mail and they don't make any decisions, and it's just going to be a real mess for financial services in the cashier's office, as well as a mess for the students and their parents. Now, starting September 2014, this is the big one. New student refund process is fully implemented for all HFCC students. All right, so this means that they're going to have to make some decisions on how they want to get their refunds back. If they accept a debit card, it's going to have to come in the mail to them. So again, I think this is going to have to be something that, although we're going to do it during the summer, we're going to also have to do it for all new students that are admitted in August. If If they go to the orientations, we're going to have to tell them. When they deal with financial aid, I'm sure financial aid will definitely inundate them and beat them about the head and shoulders with this fact, because they really have to realize what's going to happen. And then, you know, in March of 2015, it's hard to believe we're talking about 2015 already, but we meet with, the CPI meets with financial services for a review, see how it's going. I don't know what we would do really during that review. If we found out it was a catastrophic failure, I think we would know ahead of time. But we all really feel that this would be, at this point, it would be just pulling up issues and thinking about ways that could be fine-tuned. And then September 2015, we do a 12-month after live review of the process, and then, you know, maybe a big party, maybe T-shirts. Okay, but we won't get the T-shirts until we're successful. Okay. And Kevin volunteered to buy them. Cashmere T-shirts. Okay. All right, and to bring this up to wrap it up is Kevin.
There would just be a small speck of cashmere on each collar. All right. Making this process improvement recommendation a reality will require the efforts of a number of key people across campus, including but not limited to the CPI team, members Barb Eisterhold and Kevin Culler, myself, John Sikowski, along with a number of other financial services staff, the HFCC Communications Department, as Sandra made reference to, both for print and other media communication of the effort, and then also enrollment services staff who would be handling this via email, phone, and face-to-face with the students in terms of educating them of such a process. It'll also, all these areas will be involved in the work required to adjust the student refund process. In terms of steering committee feedback, I guess before I go through this, just two really quick disclaimers on things that were mentioned earlier. Barb did mention a 2 to 3 week incentive for getting electronic refunds. Federal regulations would not allow 2 to 3 weeks. They would allow 2 to 3 days, though, perhaps. And some schools do that, where they will make the refund available to the student a couple of days earlier if they get it electronically as opposed to a paper check. Can't go past the 14-day period. Scott also alluded to ATM fees and debit card fees, which I talked about earlier as well. And there are a lot of financial aid regulations that limit those as well, although there's some other areas where there's flexibility in that. So as we looked at third-party vendors for this and rolling out a program, we'd look obviously to not only make sure they were in compliance with the regulatory standards, but in those areas where fees were allowed, that we minimize those to the student's benefit. In terms of steering committee feedback, our process improvement recommendation doesn't necessarily lend itself well to a piecemeal implementation. It's more of a continuous flow if it's rolled out. While you could start and stop potentially, it's not something where you can pick, we'll do these 3 and those 6. It's basically almost an all or nothing thing to a large extent, although there probably are snippets of the things that we talked about that could be pulled out and done piecemeal. With this in mind, we need to ask ourselves if we would like to significantly reduce time and cost associated with in-house student refunds. We've heard that there's quite a bit of time in several offices as well as a lot of cost that's associated with that right now. Secondly, in doing so, we should also pursue the option to option to outsource a majority of student refund processes. As Barb alluded to, there are many third-party vendors out there that already do this for a number of our colleges. Almost half of the community colleges in Michigan already have such a service, and almost all universities. Well, I don't know if all might be too strong, but a large number of the universities also employ third-party vendors to assist with the refunds in this way. Third, if so, we would recommend that we develop and then release an RFP hopefully December 13th, if that's a little optimistic, no later than January, so that we could go forward with meeting a goal of a pilot program in spring, summer, and full implementation in the fall. Finally, fourth, we would recommend that we outsource the student refund process with a soft implementation, as I just mentioned, in spring, summer, and a full implementation in the fall of 2014. As part of this, we would look to improve student financial literacy in conjunction with a third-party vendor, where we had some of our own initiatives to educate students financially, but many of the third-party vendors will also provide additional services electronically and sometimes in person to help educate the students in financial literacy-related matters. It would be important for this type of initiative. Once complete, we would then look at reallocating resources assigned to student refund check creation. As Tom indicated, there are lots of things in most of our offices on campus that we'd like to do, but we just don't have the time or the resources to do at the moment. And so it's not like people wouldn't have anything else to do, but there's lots of side projects that are really important that we haven't been able to get to, and hopefully we would reallocate the time in that way. While the cost would be a true savings in terms of the physical cost. And then finally, we would review the effectiveness of the new process, as Sandro indicated, about 6 months out and 12 months out. As we explored our initial project statement and as we worked through this particular process improvement recommendation, we identified a number of different topics, some related to this one and some not related to this one, that could be explored by future process improvement teams. Scott alluded to a couple of those, but I'm going to go over these real quick. They include things such as creating additional efficiencies in the student refund selection process, where we can easily identify students who have had refunds in prior terms, students with stale dated checks, and students with credit balances. We could look at another initiative could be to automatically apply prior semester credit balances where appropriate by regulation to current charges. To implement a comprehensive financial literacy program at the college. We've talked about that. We've already started that beforehand as part of the tuition amnesty piece, and we've talked about it throughout this presentation as that being an initiative. But it really, in my mind at least, and as we talked in the committee, financial literacy isn't the responsibility of just one particular area. It's not just a financial aid issue. It's not just a financial services issue. It really needs to be a college-wide issue. And so that's an area that we could perhaps explore as another process improvement. An additional one would be bad debt deterrence, having initiatives that would specifically tackle bad debt. We've obviously already implemented a number of things in the fall that the numbers are showing us right now are having a positive impact, and a very positive impact in that area, but there's still additional room to improve there, and so having a process that would look specifically at that may be a good idea. Number 6, dealing with pending financial aid. Pending financial aid is really aid that's been awarded, but it has not yet paid or dispersed in most cases. And there are some third-party servicers that provide services with that. There are things internally that we can do as the student accounts receivable office and cashiers area see that pending aid, and then we look at how we treat that in terms of a student's balance that's due, whether we protect them from a deregistration, whether we make them sign a payment plan or other initiatives that could go along that way. So how we deal with the concept of a pending aid. 7, we could look at developing an institutional process for contract approvals. 8, examine why we have the number of check requests we do as opposed to requisitions. I think that stemmed out of some things that Barb and Mary brought up during the discussions about in many cases where it would be more appropriate to do a requisition for a payment. We still have a lot of areas and individuals using check requests. So examining that process and how we can turn that around to a model that's more appropriate from a financial accounting standpoint. 9, how to get the whole campus involved in the budget process and how might a particular department know what its budget is. So focusing on the budget process itself and educating staff about what that is and how to monitor it and use it. And 10th, the deregistration process itself. I've alluded to that a couple times here and before. We've done a lot to fine-tune it in the last year. I think like a lot of things, there's still additional ways that we can fine-tune, and some of these things you have to do a little bit at a time, and some you learn more things by doing things. So there could be some further, could potentially be a further process improvement team that looked at the deregistration process in and of itself. Finally, in closing, I want to acknowledge the process improvement team. Would like to thank the following contributors for their work with the team in developing a strategy to improve the handling of student financial aid refunds at the college. Dave Cunningham in Financial Services provided us a lot of information and assistance. Dr. Jensen, of course, with our bi-weekly meetings and some side consultations he had with some of the staff on the materials that we prepared. Rhonda Johnson in the Bursar is integral in getting the information together for us in terms of how the current check process actually runs. Tim Sequin in the accountant in the financial services area, and Fred Steiner, our purchasing supervisor, and we want to acknowledge him probably just as much for the help that he will have to provide if this initiative is approved, as for that help that he's already approved in getting to this point, or provided in getting to this point. And finally, we also want to recognize our sponsor, John Sitkowski, for all of his assistance along the way in getting things rolling and keeping us on track. Thank you.